What's up, everybody? Welcome to KMU CYA's tutorials, lesson 2, Introduction to Users and Privileges. I'm your presenter, Evans Devanche Wadia. Alright, now let's talk about users and privileges. So, what are we going to learn in this lesson? We look at what the commands we're learning. So, now we'll do a quick user privilege overview. From there, we are going to talk about the ch command, which is the chmod command that's going to let us change the permissions on a file or directory. We're going also to talk about how we're going to add users with adduser command. From there, we're going to take a look at a couple of important commands. The first one is the etc password file, and the other one is the etc shadow file. So the etc password file basically is not actually where the passwords are stored on a machine. Rather, the etc shadow file, it's the one which stores the hashes. But the etc password file does store what users are on the machine, and you can correct that to the shadow file. So we'll talk about those in more detail and their importance to penetration testing. So very important here. And we're going to talk about su, which is the switch user command. And finally, we'll talk about sudo, which is a command that allows you to elevate your privileges on a Linux machine. So let's go ahead and dive right into our lesson. Okay, so now we're going to cover users and privileges. So let me bring up my terminal. Okay, so in the last video, we touched a little bit on privileges with our ls-la, and we touched a little bit on the users by changing the password of our root account. So now we'll cover a few more commands regarding those. So if we look again at ls-la, so now we can see here we have all this crazy, jumbled wordage over here, right? So it actually means something, So we can look at the first line. If we see at the first line here, we have a D, okay? This means something, okay? Here we have an hyphen or a dash, okay? All these things, they basically mean something. So if we see a D, that means actually it's a directory. And then if we see a dash or hyphen, it means it's a file. Okay? So then you see RWX, and so RW and X actually means read, write, execute. So it's a permission settings that is just what particular group is for. Okay, or particular group as. So this particular group, for example, desktop has this kind of permissions, and you can see that okay, this desktop it's a directory because here at the first point here we have a D. Okay, here where we have a dash or hyphen, it's a file. Okay, now great. Now there are three groups in here. Is the first group. Well, the first group, which is here, or the first group of a second group, and of a third group. Okay. So our first group actually here, it is what we call the owners of the file. So it looks like the owner of the file has basically full read, write, execute, right? And then the next set, which is here, this basically next set, we can see that these are permissions for the members of the group that own the file. Okay, so if this group ownership is opposed to, this is a group ownership, rather, it is a group ownership as opposed to the actual. As opposed to the actual ownership here. Yeah, so for the people in that particular group, they can basically have access to this file. They can only read and execute. Okay, they can only read and execute. This is the owners group. Okay, this is the owners group. The first line, this is the owners group. Then this set right here, as I said, it is the group owner. Okay, it is the group owner of that particular file. And the last one, which is here, the last one, which is just all other users. Okay, so it's for others, or we can say all other users. So any common user here can actually just read and execute. They can't write to a document. So that comes into play, especially when we get into penetration testing. Because with penetration testing, we're looking to have full access, right? So we're always going to look for that folder that has full read write. Typically, if we look at, let me just show you something. Okay, let me just say ls dash la. Okay, made a mistake there. Dash la. Okay, so now I want to show you something. If you look at the temp, okay, this tmp folder, okay, this tmp folder, that's where our folder is located, as we can see. So you see this temp folder. This temp folder basically is very important. Why? Because it has a full read write execute. So if we're doing penetration testing, then we're trying to upload some sort of exploits, we might actually upload it into this folder. Okay, we might actually upload it into this particular folder, because that's where we can execute those files basically. However, we could also be looking for some full read write execute files, that they can be need for us to modify them and give us root access to the system as well. But this particular folder is very important. So if you want to let's say upload your exploits, you can upload them in this particular folder, because you have all the access which you need to execute them. Okay, great. Now we're going to cover that more once we get into the actual penetration part of this particular course. So let's make a file here. Let's make a file. Okay, and I'm just going to make a file. We'll just echo another text document right here. So we'll just say hello, then pipe it to incognito.txt. Okay, great. Okay, so now we do an ls-la. Okay, so now I want to see where my user is. Okay, so as you can see, this is a text file which I've created, and here we have an hyphen. So it's basically showing that okay, what you have created, it's a file. Okay, we have created basically a file. So by default, we only have read, write, and then access for everybody else. Okay, of read and write, and access for everybody else in this particular group. So meaning if we wanted to read, we can just say cat, then .txt. Now we can see what is inside our text file. It just says hello. Okay, so I have basically viewed the the things which are inside this particular file because of the permissions which I have. I can read and write, but I can't execute this file. Perhaps if it was more like an exploit or it was a script, I couldn't have access to execute, because here I only have read and write, and access for everybody else. They can only read, that's all. So what can you do here? Well, we can use something called chmod. In changing the mode is a chmod. Basically we have a couple of options here. So what we can do, we can just say chmod. Okay, chmod. Then now what we can do a right there. Okay, and we can say, well, we want read, write, execute, right? Or we can just say we want execute, right? But another way I like doing it is you have a number feature here. So the one you really need to know, is all sevens. It is all sevens, which will give you full read write access across the board. So if we say chmod, then 777, and then incognito text file. Okay, now let me try to list again the contents. Okay, so now here we can see that there's something which has basically changed, So changing the mode is very critical, because here we can see that something has basically changed. Our text file has turned into what you can say green. Okay, it has turned green, and the permissions here have changed. Everybody else now can read, can write, and execute to this particular file here, So now here we have full permissions for everybody with the 777. So chmod 777 will basically provide us with everything, all the privileges which we need, So 777 is very, very important, it is very important. So just remember 777, or if you want, you can just do plus X will work as well. So changing the mode is critical, and we're going to cover it time and time again throughout this course once we get a little bit deeper. So a couple more things we need to talk about. Say we wanted now to add a user. Let me just clear this out and go back to my terminal. Okay, so now say we wanted to add a user. So now what can we do here? So well, there's this feature called adduser. So we say add user. Okay, if we say add user, and basically we have one or two names which is allowed for us to input here. Okay, so we need to add a user. Okay, so in my case I'll add a user James. Okay, so in my case I've added a user, basically James. Okay, now let me just press enter. Okay, so it has made something for James, So now let's give him a password, Let's give him a password. Okay, give him a password again. Okay, just hit enter for the defaults. Yes, all is correct. So now we have a username James, and we can confirm that we can actually cut, for us to confirm. So we can just say cut. Remember the file which I talked about, the etc. Okay, so etc, then passwd, Okay, great. Now you can see down at the very bottom here, at the very bottom, you can see this user James. So this etc password file, basically, you are going to become very familiar with it because it shows you all the users in this particular system. It shows you all the users. Now, there's a lot of times you are going to, when you're doing penetration testing, you're going to have access to this etc password file because it doesn't provide the password anymore. So maybe that could be the reason why you can be having access to it. But it used to a long time ago. It used to provide passwords a long time ago, but now passwords are in shadow file. So you actually have a little bit of access, information disclosure here at the hands of poor configuration. Why? Because you can see that okay, you have something useful. You have the username, which is James. Okay, say there's an SSH on a machine or something else. We can we can basically use that using the same James to try and break into the machine so that we can break it and have access to that particular machine. Okay, so we'll cover that again later. So now, but if we wanted to see what the etc shadow file looks like, let me just cut the etc shadow file so we see how it looks like. So the etc shadow file, we'll see what it basically contains. Okay, so here we have the etc shadow file. Okay, so now here on the etc shadow file, now we can see that we've got this jumbled crazy stuff right here. Okay, or this all jumbled crazy stuff right here. But now our main concentration here, it's on the hashing format. Okay, it's on the hashing format. So what we are doing here is we're actually we can actually use a tool, since we have this hashing format. So this is the hash which has been basically converted, this is the password for James, so it has been hashed, it has been hashed. This is the password for our user who is James, basically. So now what you can actually do, you can use a tool, or like you can use hashcat to break down or crack this password. Now password will be very easy for you to crack, but just know that if you have access to the etc shadow file, you have a good chance of cracking the password depending on your capabilities and depending on your strength of the password that allow you to access to that particular machine. So something to think about it as well. Okay, so you can, as I said, you can use multiple tools, hashcat to crack this particular hash, which can be cracked, and you can have access to this particular user. Okay, so now we have our user here, James. Now let's go ahead and switch to him. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to him. So we can use something called SU, which stands for switch user, and you say SU, then James. Okay, let me just say SU for switch user, James. Okay, great. So automatically we have switched to James. Okay, it gave us James here. Now let's see if we can switch back to our root, because here now we are James. Okay, now let's see if we can switch back to root by doing su then root. Okay, so we can just switch back. We cannot just switch back to root, as we can see here. We cannot just switch back to root because we need the root password, right? So we can just type in the password, which basically will work. But if we didn't know the password, then we would be stuck on James, you know. So we can just provide the password for root here. Okay, so password failure. Okay, so I'm trying to switch back to root. So since we know the password for root, so we can go back. Okay, we're now back to root. Okay, so as I said earlier, we cannot easily go back to root if we have changed to other user, because we need, this time we need to know the password for root. Okay, otherwise we can be just stuck, you know. So this is how basically how it works, you know. But if we didn't know the password for root, yeah, definitely we could have been stuck to James. Okay, so we were able to access James because we are already root. Okay, this is the reason why we were able to access James. It's because we are already root. So this comes into play in terms of users. Let's go back to incognito here. Let's go back to James rather. Okay, let's go back to James. Let's go back to James. Okay, great. Now, if you are a user, you have to be able to do certain things, right? You need permissions to do certain things. So root has full access and permissions to do everything, but James, we can just but James, which we just created here, James doesn't have any sort of access. Okay, James doesn't have any sort of access. So if we wanted to change the password, say wanted to change the password for root, I can modify the password information. I can't modify the password information for root, you know. Let me just try to see if I can change the password. I'm James here, as you can see. Here I'm James. So let me see if I can change the password for root. You know. Okay, so that's a typo. Passwd, then root. Okay, so you may not view or modify the password information for root. Okay, so I don't have that kind of access to change the password for root. Now there's something called a sudo, which can provide James with access. So if we give it to him, James can have access, you know. So it's called a sudo as file, or what we call a sudo as file. And basically anybody in that sudo as file can change permissions given if they have a sudo user. So we would type in sudo password, you know, so that we can have sudo privileges as well. And it's going to ask the password for James. Okay, so let's try if we can do that. So we use sudo so that we have those privileges for root. Okay, so now here we're just saying sudo passwd then root, since you want to change the password for root. Okay, so now here we have seen that it is asking us for password for James. Okay, it means the password for James. So let's just type in the password for James. Okay. Okay, so let's type in the password for James here. Okay, 3 incorrect intents. Okay, so in this case, even though we could have typed in the password for James, we can't basically access we can't basically access the root. Even if we use sudo, we cannot change the password for root. Why? The reason being, James is not in the sudo as file. Okay, so even if we know James he puts in his password so that he can change the password for root, that cannot work because James is not in the sudo as file. So that's how it works. In this case, we can say he has something what we can call lower privileges. And we'll get into more like accounts. Okay, so we can just try to escalate in the privileges with what we used. So now the chances of you doing that, of you escalating the privileges for you to change the password for user in the sudo as file, or for you to be in the sudo as file, the chances are that they are very low. You're not likely to gain access. You can't gain access to the root. So by now, just know that if you want a user or other than root to have access to the file permissions, you need them to be in the sudo as file. So they need to be in the sudo as file. So for example, you can just say usermod. So don't worry about this command. This command will basically cover it as well. So capital G. Then you can just say sudo then James. Okay. So using this command, we can actually add James into the what we call sudo as file. Okay, we can add James into the sudo as file, and James can have now full access as root. Okay, so this is the command which you can use if you want to add that particular user into the sudo as file. So now that becomes useful in penetration testing, because you can look at the sudo as file if you have access to see what users have sudo privileges. Okay, so that's it on the users and privileges. Okay, for this lesson, that's it. And in the next lesson, we're going to be covering basically you're creating, viewing, and editing files. Okay, so until next time, thanks for having me.